All right, guys, we are going live. We are now live. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Personal Defense Network Training Talk with Barret, Kendrick, and Deryck Poole. We are joined this week with special guest Jamie Union. Jamie's coming in. He's got a background in law enforcement. He's coming in. We're going to have our main discussion tonight will be a lot about talking about interacting with law enforcement while armed. Concealed carry permit holders, open carry for that matter, or even in the context of something like home defense, where maybe you've called police and they're coming to respond to something like an intruder, potential intruder. So excited to have Jamie on tonight. Welcome, Jamie.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Deryck, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. And I'm sure you're doing great because you just said so, but you were dodging tornadoes today, weren't you, in Louisiana?
Yeah, we had some nastiness that came through Louisiana. We seemed to, where I live, it was we had a lot of wind, had a tremendous amount of rain, but they had two touchdowns probably within 15 miles of where I live or so, and in the southeastern part of the state we had a total of 6 tornadoes through it with a storm that ended up coming through. So it's I haven't seen major damage. I don't know about any injuries or deaths. I saw a couple of cars that were flipped upside down, that kind of stuff. But hopefully, as I kind of catch up on the internet later on tonight, we'll kind of see how all that went. How's Florida going? I'm actually not in Florida this week, so
I know this is our first official show where you are actually at home for the show.
Yeah, pretty much,
right?
Pretty much. I think this may be the second one, but I think the majority of them have actually potentially been filmed in Florida. So I'm home. I'm sure I'll make it back there within a week or so.
Cool.
How about you, Jamie? How are you doing tonight?
Good. We finally got a break from the rain here in Ohio. I think it's rained for about 40 days and 40 nights. We're finally up over the 70-degree mark, which is nice for spring.
I just came in from Sacramento, California yesterday, and that was hot. I don't know what we were. Had to have been close to 100. I felt like the sun was on the range, not really above the range. It kind of felt like it was right there, but it's still a beautiful area of the state, and enjoyed being there without a doubt. Great food, great company, great students.
Yeah, as you can tell, last week was our training week on the range for the agency. So running the range all week, I got a little bit of sunburn here.
A little bit of sunburn. So what's underneath the hat?
No sunburn.
No sunburn.
Give you a little sneak peek. There you go.
There you go. Now we can see why Jamie's hot in his eyes throughout the night. Well, guys, welcome. Looking forward to a good night. For everybody tuning in tonight, remember, I think last time we were on the show, I kind of finally figured out how to put your comments on the screen, at least temporarily. So if you've got questions, and I'll try my best to kind of pay attention to those. Deryck will pay attention to them, and I will try to post your comments or your questions up on the screen. So make sure you stay engaged, because we really, this is be a great time tonight with Jamie on here, and there should be a lot of questions and answers coming through. So look forward to seeing the engagement on that and your questions and everything else. But welcome to the show. As mentioned tonight, we're going to talk a lot about interacting with law enforcement. So Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement?
Sure. All my law enforcement time's been here in Ohio. This is my 18th year going into my 19th. Started out first 4 years of my career with a inner city, real busy department, transitioned to some college law enforcement for a little bit, and then to the position that I'm in now, which is your typical suburban police department, 25, 30 officers, and ran through different units since I've been there, from patrol to the motorcycle unit, federal task force, as well as my current position with the Detective Bureau.
Awesome. I guess through that time, you've probably dealt with more than one, concealed carry permit holder, or somebody like us in the context of home defense or something that maybe called police and they're responding and having to deal with the homeowner as well as any potential intruders.
Sure. We got concealed carry in Ohio in 2004, and I thought it was super important that our agency kind of get out in front of it. So the best way to do that is learn the law inside and out. A couple other officers and myself started training citizens in the concealed carry program, which allowed us to learn the context of the law inside out. And shortly after 2004, I've been putting on yearly update clinics for my officers so that they can interact with the public with a knowledgeable understanding of our law and still afford them, the rights without kind of interfering with the daily carry that, they're going to have out in public.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, I guess let's off. This is as personal offense. Obviously, we've got a lot of listeners, a lot of followers that do have a carry permit, or maybe they're covered by constitutional carry in their state. Let's talk about interacting with law enforcement on the inside of a vehicle. Now, I know that like in every state's going to be a little bit different. In Louisiana, we have a requirement here. If you have a concealed carry permit, you're actually carrying concealed on your person, then by law, we're required to notify that officer in an official capacity that we're carrying a weapon on our person, even submit to a pat down, or they have the legal right to disarm us at that point, under the concealed carry permit law. So let's kind of talk about that. Tell us, a little bit about interacting with concealed carry permit holders on the side of the road in the context of maybe a traffic stop.
Sure. I think a lot of it is in the context of the officer's training and knowledge and understanding of the law. The more comfortable they are with the law, and the more comfortable they are with their personal beliefs with the citizens carrying, I think a lot smoother the interaction can go. One of the biggest things that I see run into a problem is when there's arguments over context of law or application of the law. It can really escalate a very simple interaction with the police officer or the citizen pretty quickly. Ohio, as you said, Barrett's the same as Louisiana. We have a duty to inform. Our current legislation that we have now is trying to remove that. But I always think that depending on the context of the interaction with the law enforcement officer, it's not a bad idea to let them know that you're armed. I don't think it really impacts your right to carry or the fact that you're giving up information to law enforcement. I think it makes it a more comfortable and safe interaction for both parties.
And what about Florida? How's Florida law, Deryck?
Florida is not, there is no duty to inform. So Jamie sort of hit on it. I was going to ask, what do you think? So like our state, we don't have to let them know. Now, me personally, anytime I've been pulled over for a traffic violation, I let them know. I don't have to, but just for the mere fact that if my wallet's in my pocket or I'm digging around down in my waistband area, going into pockets or something, I don't want to potentially have them see that I have a gun and then have them caught off guard.
Yeah. And I think that's a good practice, Deryck. And one thing I'll add to that is, there's a lot of difference of opinions on if you should disclose. I talk to, as you know, I travel and train, and we talk to students, and some of them feel comfortable doing that, disclosing to the law enforcement officer. Some of them feel that it's going to escalate the situation. So if you're in the camp where, you're in a state where it's not a duty to notify the law enforcement officer, I think a good rule of thumb to have is anytime that it's going to change from a simple traffic stop or a simple personal interaction, to where there's going to be some type of enforcement action, or maybe you're asked to step from the vehicle for some reason, that might be a good time, whether you have the duty to inform or not, to advise that officer that you are armed, so that they can find out that you are carrying that weapon, whether it's lawfully or not, before you have that uncomfortable interaction, like you said, during a pat down, or maybe they see it printing on your clothing or something like that. It can really calm down that situation, make it more comfortable before anything escalates.
Yeah, I remember a story out of Florida, maybe last year, the year before, and that you had a concealed carry permit holder carrying a firearm in the context of a traffic stop. And at some point, the officer saw the gun printing through the shirt. Deryck, you remember that?
Well, was it an older gentleman wearing like a Bahama type shirt getting out of a minivan?
Probably so. Is that on camera?
Yeah. Yep. And the gentleman is out of the vehicle. He reaches back into the vehicle to see something. He's a strong side carry, and the officer sees the bottom of the holster or whatever as the guy's leaning into the car. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Officer came pretty alerted to it.
Yep. Yeah, that one pretty bad. The officer got very agitated very quick. I believe the guy got cited with unlawful display of a firearm. Which is, in Florida, you have to keep it concealed, right? It is, but there's another law that was added to inadvertent. Like if I'm if I'm doing something up, whatever, and my gun's displayed for half a second, you see the grip of the gun as I'm reaching for a high shelf in a store or something. That's supposedly protected under that variant, the way the law was changed. But, it doesn't stop somebody from calling the police and having the police show up.
Yeah. And, when it comes to little nuances, different nuances like that, especially as we get more reciprocity from state to state, the way Ohio's reciprocity law is written, and I can't speak for Louisiana or Florida, is that if we have reciprocity with a state, you have to abide by the rules of the particular state that you're in under their permit, which could be distinctly different than Ohio's laws. It's your responsibility as a traveling person to learn the laws of the area that you're going to be in. And so when you have nuances like that, I think if you keep a very simple interaction response, regardless of where you're at, and err on the side of the caution, understanding that at the time of the interaction, whether you like it or not, the law enforcement officer is the authority figure until things de-escalate. When you look at it from that respect, I think it really can make it more comfortable for both parties and keep things from escalating into something that neither person really wants to get into at the time.
I agree.
Yeah, sorry, Barret. Most law enforcement officers that I know, and I travel and teach with a lot of police departments, are very pro citizen carry. Now, you're going to have a different answer for everyone from every officer that you see out there. But some of the problems that you hear come from those extremes, whether it's from the law enforcement side of the extreme on the enforcement side or a personal opinion, or from the concealed carry side, whether it's their personal perspective of maybe an interaction they had with a law enforcement officer or a perception that they're going to have.
Yes, absolutely. And it's another thing in Louisiana, and this, this may be a thing in Ohio too, but it's like our permits are now tied into, for lack of better terms, they're tied into the driver's license database, which is also tied into vehicle registration, being that a simple run of the license plate will show a police officer with that console in the car that we have a concealed carry permit, or that the registered driver to that car has a concealed carry permit prior to us even realizing we may be pulled over for that matter. So it's I think it's it's always in our best interest, I believe, to inform. I know that there's people that probably disagree with that, especially getting into states that may not be as firearm friendly as some other ones. But I think that what we don't want to have happen is kind of what you pointed out, that both of y'all have, is that at some point during that investigation, that law enforcement officer ends up finding out about that. And then, that person being alarmed, like the guy over in Florida, that could have been diffused probably pretty quickly with just the information up front.
Sure.
Or at least taking the recommendation that Jamie said, right? The minute you're getting out of the vehicle, or you're asked to step out of the vehicle, that's a good time that you might want to let it be known. Yeah,
absolutely.
And one of the, sorry, Deryck, one of the other things that I think is important to understand is that, the law enforcement officers, in the context of whether it's a traffic stop or a public interaction, always have that discretion to enforce certain aspects of the law, or depending on their perspective of how they perceive the events happening. And cooperation on both sides and a smooth interaction can really impact how that discretion is put out, if that makes sense.
Yep, definitely. So so we got one question. We actually had two.
Yep.
Did you see the first one, Jamie?
I can see the question from Anthony.
Yeah.
And in regard to a DOT inspection, I'm going to assume that's similar to our efficiency checks or things like that, where you have to go to a state-sponsored center and have the vehicle inspected.
It said DOT inspection or scale house. So I don't know, maybe the truck inspections.
Sure. And I think that's going to vary from state to state. Now, Ohio, when our law first came out, you're not allowed to carry or possess a weapon in the rest areas, which were state-owned buildings, or the service plazas on the interstate. That very quickly got changed in one of the early revisions, because obviously you have travelers and they're not going to be able to enter the rest area with the firearms. And they were always allowed to leave it in the vehicle. But again, we know leaving weapons unattended in the vehicle is probably not the best idea either. So I think it's really going to go back, Anthony, to what your state says in regard to the state-owned buildings and things like that. Usually there's always a provision. And again, I encourage you to check it, but there's usually a provision for leaving the firearm in the vehicle or outside your reach or access. And depending on what your statute says, that might be something to refer to. And when all else fails, it's real simple to just pick up the phone, and usually the state police or county sheriff will probably be your best reference for your particular venue.
Yeah, maybe the Department of Public Safety is in charge of the permits and then enforcing the regulations that goes along with that. And I know that we have some roadside inspections as well. where they're being handled with state police with powers of arrest. And I think that, that falls under at least Louisiana law. Granted, I'm not an attorney. So good question for an attorney, right? But that's, if it is a public safety officer, then by law, at least here, we have to notify and any within an identified manner and official purpose. So that kind of falls under that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back, and I don't want to start beating this dead horse like this early in the show, but I think it goes back to common sense. It's one of those interactions where if you have to come out of the vehicle for the inspection to take place, or they have the ability to go into your vehicle and look for certain things like maybe safety equipment, road flares, things like that, if you're in a truck situation, and they might come across that firearm. Obviously, if it wasn't mentioned, they might have questioned whether it's, legally being carried or something along those lines. So why not just head off that uncomfortable interaction in the beginning and let them know that that's in the position that it's in, or that you're carrying the firearm, and get the guidance from them while you're on scene before that, it's still positive before a negative interaction even starts.
Yeah. We've got another question from Ernie. Ernie, see if he kind of reposted it a little bit. But he said, the citizens are the only ones that know that they aren't a threat. So he basically said, therefore, our movements and the things that we do are similar to what violent people do also. And the burdens and responsibilities are on us as the citizen, in that context, to slow down and remember that, these officers aren't mind readers. Is that in the end of the day, you are talking about people carrying firearms, and, and we have to be cautious with everything that we do, right? We always talk about how to stay away from words like, hey, I've got a gun and that kind of stuff while sitting there reaching for your wallet, to show identification. That's the kind of recipe that where multiple things could end up going wrong, where disaster can happen.
Sure. And I think it comes back on both sides, on the private citizen as well as the law enforcement officer, Barret, to confidence and training. And what I mean by confidence is confidence in their ability to know what they can and can't do, and to have that script kind of to perform when they get in those situations, kind of role playing that beforehand. And also confidence in the officer to understand their prior training and interactions with people, because as a law enforcement officer, I react far more off of human behavior and interaction than I do words on a law book, if that makes sense. So,
absolutely.
The officers have a duty. We often, and I agree with the person who asked the question, saying that, we don't know what someone's intentions are. And if we see a gun absent knowing or being advised that the person is a legally armed citizen, it may raise some question before things calm down. But I think it's also important to understand, and for my fellow law enforcement officers to understand, that you have a duty if you work in a jurisdiction that allows concealed carry, or a state that allows a citizen to carry concealed, whether it's constitutional carry or under permit provisions, to educate yourself on what those laws are so you can properly enforce them. Because we shouldn't look at it as law enforcement officers as I gotcha, I found a loophole to charge you because you're carrying a firearm. We should be able to understand, just like we give discretion on traffic stops for speed or seatbelt or something like that, be able to understand that people sometimes, maybe in one of those states where they do have a duty to inform, maybe they weren't thinking about it because they're worried about getting their next point on their driver's license and won't be able to drive a school bus anymore. So that's their primary thought. So I also challenge the law enforcement officers, if they're listening, to not always put that burden on the citizen. Take pride in your job and understand the laws and the application of the law so you can help that citizen be better, just like we would interact with a speeder and educate them on the law and give them some advice. We can do the same thing in these situations and make it a more positive interaction than always making it negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does sound like you as an individual, plus as your agency, that y'all have taken a pretty proactive step to get the knowledge on the laws and to get the training that surrounds that.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have anyone listening from Ohio. I think that would be a fair statement from Ohio. I think one of the things that our state's pretty well known for, even though there are some discretions in that, is the smaller agencies have to do a lot of in-house training. And if they're not educating their officers in these positions, as we see more and more folks carrying concealed, then we end up in a situation of where we don't know what we can or can't do, and the citizen doesn't know what they can or can't do. And in the concealed carry world, especially in the training aspect here in Ohio, and I'm sure it's Louisiana and Florida too, the difference in trainers that our concealed carry folks that we encounter are dealing with goes from professional to downright negligent. So we have to, and we can easily say it's the burden of the citizen to figure that out, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And our job as law enforcement officers sometimes is to help educate that, not always slam them with some type of law violation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Florida, Barret and I've talked about this on the show, I think, before, but our training requirement, there is no hours, no requirement other than the person teaching the class has to see the student show proficiency with a firearm. And that proficiency could be as simple as firing a couple rounds of non-lethal training ammo. I've heard all sorts of stories. So they don't even touch the law of where you can and can't mindset things or anything like that in a lot of classes, which is really more important than the actual shooting portion, in my opinion, when it comes to carrying a gun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's we cover a good bit of material in mine, but it's the same thing everywhere, right? Ohio, Florida, Louisiana, or anywhere else for that matter. And like I said, it really applies to any profession. Is you're going to have some people that are really good with their job and they're very thorough, and then you're going to have some, like you said, that are downright negligent that should not be teaching at all. Definitely should not be in a position that help where they're helping prepare people for life or death situations.
Yeah, and I really think it comes down to whether, regardless of what side of the fence you're on, I'm surprised we haven't had a question about it yet in regard to the training. There's a lot of folks out there that don't think training should be a requirement to have a concealed carry permit. And, I'm of the boat. I'll go ahead and put it out there that I think if you can legally own a firearm, you should be able to carry that firearm. But I also think you should have the personal responsibility of understanding that just because you can, you should probably seek out some quality training. So we can mandate in Ohio, we mandated 12 hours of training in the beginning of our concealed carry permits in 2004. It's down to 8 hours now, but it doesn't matter if it's 100 hours of training, if it's negligent and horrible training. So, I don't want to make it sound like that I think there should be a training requirement. I think any person who chooses to carry a firearm, whether it's a law enforcement officer or a civilian, should seek out quality training on their own, whether their agency or their county or their state is mandating it.
Absolutely. I personally think a lot of the required training that states put out there give this false sense of, I know what I need to know, I'm ready to go carry a gun. Whereas opposed to if they didn't have the training, people would be more likely to think, wow, I'm carrying this thing that could hurt myself or kill someone else. Maybe I should figure out, someplace to get some really good training before I go do this.
Well, and that's a very valid point, Deryck. And we see that in the law enforcement community too. And I'm sure you saw it in your professional lives where there's this fallacy of training because maybe you're spending some time in a classroom or reading some policies or signing off on some things. And, but at the end of the day, those don't make you any more proficient at the thing that you're doing. And you hit a very good point when it comes to training, and anyone in any profession has probably seen something in that context where there's a requirement, but the requirement has really nothing to do at the end of the day with the skill that you're going to have to perform or the decisions that you're going to have to make. And by simply going through that process, a layperson could easily think that now they have the tools they need to do those things. And, I equate that to something like, in our law enforcement world, we have a lot of video training or online training that we attend in some kind of high priority topics like pursuits and use of force and things like that. And some agencies will use that online training and show 6, 7, 8 hours a year of proficiency in those high liability areas. Well, it's not a replacement for the actual training in those areas through simulations and scenarios that you're going to encounter when you're on the street. And that's what I see a lot of these concealed carry programs as we travel and look at them, is the fact that exactly what Deryck said, these folks who don't know any better come into them and leave thinking they have what they need, when in fact they would have been better off being a little scared with nothing and seeking out some good quality training on their own.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, finishing up on the context of the vehicle, what's the ideal way for a concealed carry permit holder to handle a traffic stop? Let's talk about a duty to notify state. What would be ideally what you would like to see that person do on the side of the road?
Sure. I would say that, it's probably going to change the way that you interact on a traffic stop. Most people, when they get stopped on a traffic stop, when I walked up to the car when I was in patrol, would have their driver's license out. They would have their insurance card ready, or as I'm approaching the car, they're reaching over to get those items. As Deryck said, especially if you're carrying on outside the waistband or maybe even inside the waistband at that 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock position, it's really going to change the way that you should probably handle that when you come up. The best thing to do is just keep your hands in a neutral position, whether that's on the steering wheel or on the windowsill. You don't have to go to the extreme of throwing your hands out the window like you're being called out of the car or anything like that, because that's going to put up some different red flags to an officer who's really paying attention. Obviously, don't scream, "I have a gun" from inside the car, those kind of things. But if I had to give you the ideal advice, I would say keep your hands in a neutral position, probably top of the steering wheel, and simply wait till the officer gets up to the car to notify him that, my driver's license is in my pocket, my proof of insurance and my registration's in the glove box, but I am legally carrying a firearm. That's one thing I always tell folks to throw in there, is because we're listening. Our senses are kind of heightened when we're walking up to that car and having that first interaction. We're taking a lot of things in, and we're actually listening to the words that you're saying, listening to your voice, looking for behavioral cues, whether it's a rattle in the voice or a break in the voice. So we're really paying attention to those words, and throwing in the fact that you're legally carrying a firearm takes away that brashness of a cop maybe missing and only hearing firearm and then reacting to the single word, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's I've always just kind of in Louisiana, right, for permit holders, it's I have a permit to carry a firearm. I am legally carrying today, and let them drive the conversation from there, right? That's really all that has to be said. That the officer in charge will handle the question at that point.
And we're seeing a lot more positive interactions between law enforcement and armed citizens, at least in our area.
Oh, yeah.
When the law first came out in 2004, it was there was a whole lot of, well, how can we, what are our loopholes that we can use if we want to hem someone up on something like this? Not that we were actively seeking by any means to cause anyone any legal issues, but if somebody was trying to circumvent the system, how can we counteract that? And it's really gone away and officers were very, very uncomfortable in the beginning, a lot of them, with citizens carrying firearms. And that position has really, really shifted, at least in my area. And the law enforcement officers barely even bat an eyelash at it. We have so many checks and balances in place in regard to the license plate checks, the notifications, incorporating it into your traffic stop. Again, is the responsibility on the citizen to tell us that they're armed in a state? Sure it is. But is it too much difficulty for the officer who works in a state where there's a shall notify to make it part of their traffic stop when they walk up to the car and ask, can I see your driver's license, your proof of insurance, and do you have a concealed carry permit? It's not that hard to do, to take that person who's maybe focused on the traffic stop and not the fact they're carrying a gun, and kind of bring them back into that compliance, if you will. It doesn't always have to be a negative.
Right. And that's, and I'm sure people have different experiences in life, but I mean, I've been legally carrying a firearm for the large majority of my adult life. And, even though in like Louisiana, law enforcement has a legal right to take the firearm from my possession during that interaction as a concealed carry permit holder, I've never been disarmed. And I've worked with a lot of, I've dealt with law enforcement in different capacity, and I've never been disarmed. But obviously, I've dealt with a lot of concealed carry permit holders in classes and training, and with those that have had permits for years and years, it's a very small percentage that have dealt with law enforcement that have actually even been disarmed during that encounter. Certainly there have been several, but it seems like the norm, at least in my area, is that law enforcement's extremely comfortable with it. At the end of the day, by showing the concealed handgun permit, now all of a sudden, that we're showing that person doesn't have a history of violence, for the most part, is not a convicted felon, and has not had recent DWI or drug convictions, domestic violence, all that kind of stuff, right? So I would think it's almost like a way of proving that you're less likely to be involved in criminal activity than most people they're dealing with that day.
That's a fair statement, and I would the only thing I would caution with that is obviously it depends on the context of the interaction. But for your average everyday traffic stop or citizen interaction, sure. I mean, I don't want to speak for all law enforcement officers because some folks just aren't comfortable with the person across from them having a firearm, and I can understand that depending on their prior career, their interaction, their experiences. But I think for the average police officer, you're right. Once that initial contact is made. And the context of the contact is normal. It's not a domestic situation or some type of dispute.
Right.
I think it does take it down to a baseline and give you an idea of the person that you're dealing with does check those boxes, as you said, and make you a little more comfortable.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, there's no absolutes there, no hard lines. Obviously that. There's agencies, even locally, that have policies in place. They feel that if they're going to disarm one person, then it should be the norm, right? They disarm everybody. So it's obviously there's always plenty of exceptions to that, but I think you're correct in that with an officer that maybe has dealt with a lot of concealed carry permit holders or is very comfortable with firearms and has not had those issues come up in their career, that may set them at ease a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know about Louisiana, but Ohio has a provision in the law too that really discourages law enforcement officers from taking the firearm. Early on in the law, we would see, and again, I don't want to paint a broad brush, but there were law enforcement officers encountering concealed carry permit holders, taking the firearm and saying, "Hey, you're going to have to pick this up back at the station," or "I'm going to take your ammunition right now, and you can take the gun, and you'll have to pick this back up." Just because they weren't comfortable with the interaction. And we're not seeing that more. There's a provision put into the law that you have to return the firearm to the responsibly armed citizen in the same condition and manner that it was. Now, we can interpret that in different ways. I think of condition as, not damage from throwing it in my trunk or on my car. Doesn't mean if I disarm you that I'm going to return a loaded firearm to your hand. But I think the lawmakers here are getting a little more positive as the law moves forward without the scary issues that they thought they were going to see, with loosening some of these burdens and making it an equal responsibility between law enforcement and the civilian concealed carry holder to have a positive interaction and know the rules on both sides of the fence so we don't run into those kind of agitated interactions.
We had another question that just came in. Does your location change how citizen handles the interaction, city versus rural? So how the citizen handles it. I mean, you can answer that, but it kind of looks like to me that it shouldn't be handled by the citizen any different, or by the concealed carry permit holder any differently in city versus rural. However, I don't know. I guess I may interpret that a little bit differently. Would law enforcement handle it on the side of the road differently in the daytime on a city street versus 3 o'clock in the morning on the dark country road?
Well, that's a good question. But I really think that it's going to depend on the context of the interaction more than it's going to depend on the location of the interaction. So I hate to keep going back to that, but I mean, it's really a common sense approach from the law enforcement side and the civilian side. If you're walking through, dark rural property area and law enforcement officer gets a call of a suspicious person, maybe you're on your own property, your neighbor calls, whatever the case may be, and you're approached, it's probably going to be dealt with a little higher sense of security and threat awareness, and then back it down from there. But again, if you're stopped in a rural area for a traffic stop at 3 a.m, it's probably going to be handled no differently than it would be in the city. Goes back to the context of why that interaction is occurring.
Deryck, you have anything else you want to add about the context of the vehicle?
No, I think we've covered the vehicle pretty well.
Yeah, I think we did. Let's, I guess before moving on, and we'll talk more, maybe, I guess, honestly, I think Deryck has a story that we'll talk about a little bit tonight that will bring us into the context of home defense, maybe. I think it's probably a good idea to bring that in. Before jumping to that, let's talk a little bit about the Personal Defense Network training tour. We are now, I guess today is June 6th, so we're now, in the second to last month of the training tour. I know that I just came back from Sacramento, California for the last couple of days doing instructor development and mentoring and training counselors and instructor candidates and whatnot with the USCCA. Like I said, that was a fantastic location. It was warm, but it was beautiful. I got to swim in the pool in the afternoons and whatnot, and we had some of the best food that I've had in a while. So that was interesting. Tell me about what's going on with y'all with the Personal Defense Network training tour.
Well, I am actually this weekend headed to St. Augustine to take a class on the tour with Don Edwards. I've been working with a red dot pistol, so this is going to be probably my last class running it. And then after that, I am going to be in Utah. I'm going to be in Nevada with Ken Crawford and the group at Reno Guns and Range doing a carbine class and an advanced pistol handling class.
Awesome. Yeah, it's Don, obviously, solid guy, solid instructor. It's one of the classes I'm looking to get into, and he happens to come teach here in the New Orleans area a couple times a year. So to date, so far the dates haven't worked out, but I'm hoping later this year when he's here that I'll be able to make those dates. So you're going to be set out in Reno, Nevada, doing advanced pistol handling?
Correct. Yep. APH. I'll be teaching that with Ken Crawford, and then the carbine class, a 1-day carbine.
Awesome. So the advanced pistol handling y'all going to do inside, and the carbine y'all going to do outside? Or?
I'm not sure. I think we might actually be outside for both of them.
Nice.
Which I'm perfectly fine with. But
watch out for the fire ants.
Right. We got those in Florida. They're just a little bigger in Nevada.
There's some weird little lizards that live on that range out there too in Reno at the outdoor range. All the little post holes that handle the uprights. Yeah, look down in there, and they're always hiding from the sun. And with the 100-mile-an-hour winds that like to blow through in the afternoon.
Right. It's like clockwork. You need to get moving because around 1-2 o'clock the winds start, and then you're chasing targets on and off for the rest of the class.
Oh yeah. So if y'all are in the area with what's the dates, Deryck? You said next weekend?
No, this weekend, and then it's the last weekend of June. Right. I got the calendar right here. It is the 29th and 30th. So the 29th is when we're doing carbine, and the 30th is when we're doing the APH class.
Awesome. And it looks like Rob is going to be in Wisconsin picking up next week, I believe, in June 11 and 12. He's teaching intuitive defensive shooting and armed home defense tactics. We've talked about that class on the show before. It's a fantastic class if you're certainly in that area. That course will make you think a whole bunch. And then he's out in Central City, Iowa, with Cedar Valley Outfitters for armed home defense tactics again. So there's another opportunity for that for the next couple of weeks. But you can jump on the personaldefensenetwork.com website to find out other tour locations and instructors and opportunities and dates to jump in on.
Well, Jamie's also on the tour too.
Yes. Tell us about Jamie.
Yeah, I think I have 2 left, and they're both 2-person armed defense courses. One is actually outside the tour dates. It's going to be a little later in the year, and that's going to be held here in Columbus, Ohio area. And also the other one, I believe, is in New Kensington. I'm not sure if the date's up yet.
Cool. So just 45 seconds on what is the 2-person armed defense course for those people who are watching.
Sure. The 2-person armed defense course is kind of an application of the skills and concepts that we use in some of our other programs in the context of being with another armed individual. It doesn't necessarily have to be a husband, a wife. It could be someone that you interact with in public that ends up being armed. And it gives you a good idea of how to interact with those folks, interact in regard to areas of responsibility, who's responsible for what type of work during those situations, and how to work as a team to get yourself out of those situations and make good decisions.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great course. If you've got somebody that you're always with that's carrying a firearm that you like to train together, it's a really good class to jump into. Deryck and I have been around it as a student, together and with other people a couple of times. Eddie asked, when in Iowa? That date in Iowa is going to be June 14th. And that, again, is in Central City, Iowa, with Cedar Valley Outfitters, and the course is Armed Home Defense Tactics. And you can find out more about that on the ICEtraining.us webpage on the calendar, redirect you over to the calendar, or of course on the personaldefensenetwork.com training page. And you can kind of go under training and you'll see that those dates, the ones we're talking about with Jamie and Deryck and myself, and the other instructors who contribute as well that'll be teaching. So Deryck, I guess you want to tell us a little bit about the story that I guess out of Florida that you were talking about earlier.
Okay, so it happened on June 3rd, and it was in Hudson, Florida, which is Pasco County. The article, it's really kind of sketchy with details, but the broad strokes are this lady was home, and she's usually, I guess, keeps her garage door open. Noticed that the garage door was down, and then I know everybody's probably going to laugh, but she had a pet pig, and the pig started acting funny to alert her to somebody. Hey, I guess it's a guard pig. I don't know. But that's what sort of got her thinking that something's not right with the garage door being down and the way her pet pig was acting. I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing when I say it. So she called police and dialed 911 and reported somebody that she didn't know was around her house, and then got off the phone. And then the person ended up at her front door. And I don't know if they actually got in. This is where it was thin. I don't know if they actually got in and got the door open, or if she opened the door. But she opened the door with a gun in her hand and held the person at gunpoint, called 911 again, and said that she had an intruder, that she was holding at gunpoint. So at some point, the neighbor found out about it. Her neighbor, who has a gun, comes running over with a gun. And the neighbor's wife calls 911 as well. So you have two people holding this one guy at gunpoint waiting for the police to show up. A lot of the story, they were talking about how long it was taking the police to get there, twice the amount of time. So from the time, I think it was about 13 minutes when Pasco County says their average response time is 6. So the police showed up and this guy was being held. It doesn't appear that he was armed, because nowhere in the story are they talking about him having a gun or any sort of weapon, hammer, nothing like that. And he had a mental issue. There's him rambling something about his grandparents. Now, luckily, nobody got shot, but you had a neighbor who, Jamie can answer this as well. I don't think the neighbor had any place running over there with a gun in the first place. Right.
Without knowing the whole context of the story, based on what you're saying there, it does not sound like a very good decision on that aspect, especially not knowing if we're talking a situation where there's normally a much quicker response time. If that neighbor was to be intercepted by the police as they were pulling up, depending on the distance between the houses, there might not be time to explain those interactions, and that could end poorly.
Absolutely. So, and then also if she opened the door, which it appears that's what she did. She opened the door and held this person at gunpoint. So again, why even bother open the door? Why not just lock the door and move into a barricade position?
Yeah, it as many things as you can put between you and the perpetrator, it's always better. You want to get into that position, especially, I think you said there were kids in the house as well? Or did you not? I might have misunderstood that. But either way, extracting yourself and evading to the furthest possible position away from where that perpetrator is going to be, not only does that give you time to put yourself in a position of advantage, not just have a door separated between the two of you to where if the door comes down, now you're at the fight immediately, or if you open the door and they're standing there, you're at the fight immediately. Being able to evade to a position to where you can assess, have a clear line of sight to where the person's going to come through and have the best possible chance and amount of time to make a good rational decision while waiting for the police makes much more sense than being curious and looking out the door to see why your animal might be upset. It's always better to call the police and have us come and it's, a deer aggravating your pet pig than to open up the door and find someone in your garage. And then you have a fight on your hands that you may or may not be prepared for.
Absolutely. And there were kids. The one of the people interviewed, she did have 2 kids in the house with her. So the way the timeline looks like, she called the police about somebody suspicious, got off the phone with that, then called her neighbor to let them know. And then I guess while she was on the phone with the neighbor, the guy was in the doorway and standing right there, quotes. So while that happened while she was on the phone, she pulled the gun on him, and that's when the neighbor's husband starts running over with his gun. And then that neighbor got off the phone with her, and they both called 911.
Yeah. So again, it's not normal for folks to be in those situations every day. So sometimes the decisions that they make and the things that they do don't always seem rational when we're looking at them, in hindsight. But a plan in place prior to something like this happening can mitigate a lot of these bad decisions. And, if you're going to choose to responsibly arm yourself in your house, you need to have a plan like that. And you need to know how the folks coming to help you are going to respond to those calls for service. And it's one of those things where when you have an understanding of how us as the police are going to respond, it's easy to rationalize the idea that it's not good to be on the other side of the door that we may or may not be coming in contact with you at. And also, if the bad guy's on the other side of that door, God forbid he is armed and we have to take some type of enforcement action when we get there, if you're leaning against that door with your ear up against the door to see why your pet pig's reacting to some stimulus outside, you could be in the line of fire, not even know it, or put yourself in a position of disadvantage and not even know it. Staying on the phone when possible is super, super important because those 911 dispatchers are going to be relaying that information to us real time. And they're trained to calm you down, keep you calm in those situations, help you make rational decisions, and convey the information that we need to be able to better help you. No disrespect to this person or their neighbor, but it would have been much more beneficial to stay connected to the 911 operator and take advice and instruction from them and guide the officers to the right position. If the person was to change position or leave the garage or different direction to travel, now they have to make that contact. And in a place like Pasco County, where they might have multiple dispatchers that aren't aware of the other calls that came in, it can really make for a difficult arrival for the police and extend that response time sometimes. It's like taking the call all over again.
And that was the basic gist of the article. They were more concerned with how long it took the sheriff's department to respond to the incident. They didn't really touch on all the other things that went wrong by the caller in the first place.
Well, and again, not to bash this individual person, but we see stories like this all the time. And, we use that adage in our training where luck counts, but don't count on luck. Just because it turned out positively doesn't mean that it was the best possible decisions made at the time. And we can use something like this and learn from it. And it clearly shows us that having a plan and understanding how law enforcement responds is much better because we don't know why Pasco County took so long to get there. There's many, many things that could impact that response time. Anything from negligence to being short on a shift and having a high volume of calls.
Right.
And we don't know.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, like the holding someone at gunpoint, reading through, it doesn't look like this guy had any weapon whatsoever. Now there's like disparity of force, right? Like me, 6'4", 250 plus pounds. I'm a lethal threat to somebody half my size. But, this guy, maybe he was a lethal threat unarmed, but, holding a guy at gunpoint, was she ready to let him run away? What if he decided he was just going to turn and run from her?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, did she open up the door to go outside, and that's where it took place, or did he, sit there and try to get in, or was able to defeat the door?
Right. They're not clear on that in the story, but thankfully he was compliant. Right. We don't have to worry about what if, what would she have done, or what would the neighbor have done if the guy turned and run?
On the other end of the spectrum, something similar to that was the story out of Pittsburgh, maybe a year and a half ago, where the homeowners became aware of an intruder, in the house, outside of the house, coming into the house. And, they, armed themselves. And obviously, any homeowner that had a firearm with an intruder in the house, it's probably one of the decisions they'll be making at that point. What they did not realize is that law enforcement was responding to the call as well through the alarm company. The alarm already triggered a call and police were already en route responding to that. Well, the male homeowner, the husband, he had armed himself and he's kind of running around the house and looking outside, that kind of stuff. And the female, the wife, ended up contacting 911 from like the outside the second story window or something. But anyway, he potentially, I don't know who ended up firing the shots. Either he fired shots or maybe the intruder fired shots, although law enforcement never found a firearm on the intruder. But there were some shots that were fired right as law enforcement was responding. And about the same time, the homeowner, has the gun. He's running out on the front porch with a firearm. So he's running out on the front porch. I don't know if it was to greet law enforcement or to still looking out for that intruder or looking for that intruder. But as law enforcement responds, they encounter him running outside with a gun. Well, there's already a frantic 911 call because of the gunshots, and here comes the guy running out of the house with a firearm. And unfortunately, he did end up getting shot. You had multiple, I believe, that ended up firing shots because they had to make that split-second decision, and that's more of the reasons why that you're not breaching going outside of your home when you've got the opportunity and when it's safer to stay inside, because that is a risk, right? And that's one of the ways that we have to mitigate that.
Yeah, and I agree with that fully from even a tactical standpoint. You don't want to go into the unknown like that. And in the home defense course that I often teach, that's one of the things that we talk about. Trying to evade and then barricade to a position and contact those authorities and give them the information to help you. They're the trained responders. Going out and seeking that harm, even if that's in your house, even if you're in a state that legally allows you to do it with castle doctrine, if you sit back and look at it from a rational standpoint, might not always be the best decision. Now, sometimes, again, I'm not going to fault somebody if they have to get to their kids or, a loved one that's in a different position of the house. Now, that's a whole different story. But for the general curiosity of finding out what the bump in the night was, that's what you pay your taxes and pay us for. Give us the tools and the communication to be able to come help you so you don't have to put yourself or your family in that harm's way. Even if you look at it from the aspect of, even if you do everything right and have an armed encounter with somebody, there's going to be mental, physical, and financial consequences to that you might not have had to incur if you would have just barricaded, contacted police, gave them the information, and allowed us to respond and give us the tools we need to take care of that problem for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are nearing the end. I know, before we near, I'm sure that most people watching this show probably realize that Deryck, Jamie, and I work a lot together, instruct a lot together on several teams together and whatnot. And we were all together down at the USCCA Training Expo and Concealed Carry Expo. And one of the vendors that Deryck's had run-ins with the past was down there. So Deryck, since you had the first interaction with that, why don't you kind of talk about it a little bit?
Next belt. This is the original Next belt. I got it in 2015 from Rob to test. This was before Next Belt actually. They were looking to get into the concealed carry market. And the really cool thing about their belts are they have no holes. So they have this like latching system that requires no holes. So it makes it really for quick, easy adjustments. Well, they've gotten into the concealed carry space. And while we were there, myself, Jamie, and Barret were running around. We saw the booth, and I said, hey, let's go talk to the guys from Next Belt. And I don't know, you guys had a little bit of exposure to them before we got there. But they've updated their belts, and they hooked us all up with our own belt, casual belt as well as a dress belt to go out and give them a test using for our everyday carry. So, what do you guys think? I've been wearing one for a while. What's your guys' opinion?
Well, I'll go first because since the moment I got home, I've been using mine for work. My average everyday assignment is a plainclothes assignment. So I'm typically wearing my firearm either in the appendix position or outside the waistband, depending on that particular assignment that day. And I was concerned at first. I've been wearing a super rigid belt most of my career to hold the firearm up. And one of my concerns with the belt initially would be, will it hold the firearm and the weight of the magazines and the counterbalance? And then, God forbid, I have to throw on my battle belt to serve a warrant or something like that, will it support holding that weight as well? And the answer to that is yes. I've been, you guys can attest that oftentimes in this business, we'll get equipment and people want us to test it and try it, and it never makes it to us getting a chance to talk about it for many reasons. This is something that I think people need to be aware of, especially in the concealed carry or even the law enforcement community, because at least short term, I haven't had the ability to try it long term yet, but short term, I've had very, very positive response. With the quick release feature, it works really well to switch from that overt outside the waistband carry to the inside the waistband carry without having to rethread the belt and take it all the way off. And something as simple as, anyone who carries a gun inside the waistband, whether you're skinny or on the chubby side like me, knows that when you sit down, sometimes that gun can dig. This is a great opportunity to not have to open up those holes and change the position on the belt. All you have to do is hit that release and give yourself a little extra room. When you stand up, draw it nice and tight, and it's good to go. Very easy to adjust too.
So, and then Barret went to the state legislature and got to test the other one, the dress version of the next belt.
Yeah, I've been wearing the everyday carry belt, since I got it as well. Like I'd actually trimmed it in Pittsburgh, if I remember correctly, is when I ended up trimming that belt there and started wearing it. But the next day from returning, I ended up having to testify in Baton Rouge at our state legislature. So that was my first opportunity to wear the actual dress belt itself. Now, I've had a ratcheting dress belt before that I've worn, and I've been using it for a little while, and I've had issues with it, several issues with it actually slipping off to where the buckle just completely slips off the belt. And with this one, because this one's actually made for putting gear on it and carrying firearms, they have set screws. And I don't know if you can see that comes through in the video or not, but top and bottom, after you latch it in, there's some pretty heavy duty set screws that come with the belt to lock it in place. So I definitely don't foresee this one slipping off at all. But I mean, it's a good looking belt. But the bottom line is it easily and fully supports my firearm that I carry with it every single day without a doubt. So I'm looking forward to some long term testing on to continue to see how it goes. But so far, it's held up very well. I know that in talking with them, they have some new stuff in the works that I think is supposed to be out in the next couple of months, and I'm actually really excited to see this product as they get it to bring it out. And I'm sure that once it is available, hopefully we can get our hands on a couple of them, do some testing out, and also show it out to everybody.
If I can add one more thing real quick, as a person who's carried a gun for 20 plus years inside and outside of law enforcement, on and off duty, we're always looking for that perfect combination between rigid and not dig into you when you sit down. And I think this is the closest I've seen. And it's rigid enough to hold the equipment, but it's comfortable enough when you sit that it's not digging into you like some of the extra thick, heavy duty belts that are just overbuilt.
And I agree with that. I was going to say, I agree with that from a different standpoint, is that, I have lower back issues every once in a while. And the more rigid the belt is, it seems the more pressure it ends up putting on my lower back. And so I have found this one to be a really good balance, that it supports it without a doubt. You can throw the weight on there, as Onion was talking about. You can definitely put the weight on there, but yet, it's not too rigid at all. Deryck, what were you going to say?
No, the micro adjustments, like Jamie was saying, the getting up and down, in and out of the car. Before this, I was using like the rack belt, the range and carry belt, and it was sort of like I had to find a happy medium. Where was the belt tight enough when I was standing, but not too tight for when I was sitting down? And this sort of does away with that. I sit down, I hit the latch, give some space when I'm in the car. The minute, even before I get out of the car, as I'm getting out of the car, I'm just pulling on the end of the belt, and it's locking down tighter, holding the holster where it needs to be. Makes it really convenient.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was trying to look up an area real quick. Glenn was asking about training in Connecticut. Rob does actually go to Connecticut. He's not scheduled there for the rest of the year, but he usually actually does teach there. So make sure you pay attention to the Personal Defense Network training tour coming into 2020. But also, Glenn, if you're affiliated or you work with a range that may be interested in hosting, then certainly reach out, and you can certainly reach out to one of us, or reach out to the generic ICE training email address at training@icetraining.us, and we could certainly try to work with another range to get one of the instructors out there without a doubt. Cool. Well, guys, we are right at about that hour mark. Go ahead and finish out. How do people get in touch with you? Maybe not. Maybe you don't want them to get in touch with you, but if you want
let's squeeze 1 minute in. Like Jamie, right? Squeeze a minute, right? For Mission First. They're one of our tour sponsors. And they've been taking great care of us. I hooked Jamie up with one of those minimalist stocks earlier in the year, and we ran into the guys at Mission First when we were at the expo. And Jamie's got some testing time in, a little, thousands of rounds of testing time.
Yeah, probably being through every stock on a M4 style rifle throughout my career to find something comfortable. It was going to take a lot to pry me away from the cheek weld. What is that, the B4 or whatever? Yep. That is the piece of equipment that did it right there. Not only did it make my rifle lighter, it's a more positive lock, and especially for the armed professionals out there that are wearing a vest, even if you're not, the index point with that minimalist stock is probably the best I've seen in the industry. It's got a great footprint on the shoulder area, good pad on there, and if you are wearing a tack vest with equipment all the way up, it's a good point of reference there, and it doesn't get in the way like a lot of the other stocks. The magazines that we were given, they're duty magazines. You got one of those there, Deryck?
Sure
got about just under 3,000 rounds through those since the USDCA conference that we were at
a month ago.
And they are holding up great, not a single problem. Now I only have 2 of them, but I've used them. We've used them with agency guns just to test them out so we could get more rounds through them pretty quickly. And they were holding up great. You can't see in the bag there. You got one without the bag, Deryck?
Yeah, sure do. Right there.
Great index points on the bottom. The way they taper at the top is excellent. They fit all our mag wells, and I've had zero problem. I can't point at it, but where the mag inserts into the gun and the mag catch catches it up a little bit right there. Zero rounding on the, I'm going to call it polymer. I'm not sure what they're made out of, but zero rounding off there through all those thousands of rounds, and staying fully engaged with that mag latch, which is super important with the plastic mags.
Yeah, I've used their stocks and a couple of the magazines over the last couple of years. Haven't had any issues out of them whatsoever. And it's definitely any rifle that I grab's got one of their stocks on it.
Yeah, this is one of the originals. Their original Mission First, and as you can see, this one I've had this for 2-3 years, whenever it first came out, and it's got zero rounding on this either as well. This is one of my regular use magazines.
Yeah, they definitely hold up, and that's another company that they're working on some stuff for the future as well. And so I'd be super excited as they continue to roll out some great products. Cool.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted to get Mission First in there too.
No, absolutely. Great products. We always have time for them. Well, I will go ahead and, if you want to with me, you can reach me at Barret at icetraining.us. And obviously I'm on all the, social media. My company's Barret Training. So you can look me up through Instagram or Facebook with that. And y'all go ahead and, Jamie, why don't you go ahead and I'll let Deryck finish it up.
Sure. You can always reach me at Jamie at ICE Training for that side of the fence. And that's a good email to get a hold of me with any questions. I'll always answer questions from the viewers or potential students in regard to interacting with law enforcement. I'd rather have them come to someone who is gun friendly and Second Amendment friendly and concealed carry friendly than to maybe go to someone who's not going to be as knowledgeable and they don't get the right answer or the answer that they need. So I'm always willing to answer those questions. All they got to do is reach out via email.
Cool. And me, Deryck at echo5.com. Same thing. You can find me on Facebook, Echo5 Training, Instagram, Echo5.training. Same thing. If you send a message to me or Barret or Jamie, we usually will collaborate. So if you can't get a hold of one of us, try one of the others.
Cool deal. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight, and y'all have a great night. We will see you next month for another great topic.